All right, so let's just real quick talk exam one. So some of all this, your first time to take me, and boy, I like a lot of depth in the answers. So some students struggle, especially on their first exam with me. So I will allow some points to get back. So especially if you had a really disaster on a couple of questions. Why am I so picky on the depth? Well, it was an open book exam and you had hours to prepare. You should spend 10 hours plus preparing for an exam. So some of the answers look like about a 30-minute answer. So like, let me just jot some stuff down, and I'm looking for a lot more than that. You got to leave knowing this stuff. And I've had several students in this class talk about interviews they did where the stuff on these exams come up and the people are just absolutely amazed. Not that they know something about it, but that they can talk in depth about the issue. So that's what I'm after. You got to learn this stuff. So, but it is a bizarre professor. I think some students, they study for exams as if it's multiple choice, but I don't do multiple choice. And then it's open book. So it's like, wow, piece of cake. I'll just jot some stuff down from notes and I'm done. It's just, boy, that just doesn't cut it for me. I need to know. And the way I look at it when I grade papers, I'm actually reading it as if you're in an interview and they ask this question in the interview, and I'm reading it thinking, what's the chance they're going to hire you? It's kind of my answer. So, and that's the way I wish you would actually do it. So what I'll do is you can resubmit up to 2 questions. So here it goes. If you do 2, you get up to 75% on those. So if you submit 2 questions, and let's say you make a 90 on both of them, then your grade will be changed to 75 on both of them. Does that make sense? All right. Or if you do 1, can get up to 90%. So if you submit 1 question, you make 83, what will your grade change to? 83. If you get 98.7, what will you get? 90. All right. So that's the way it's set up. What if you made 60 on the first try and you make 32 on the second try? Then I just delete it, pretend like we've never met, and we'll go back to the old grade. Okay. So that's the way you can do it. This will not happen on the second exam. The second exam, most students like a lot better because it's tremendously mathematical. And it's a lot of pricing formulas, which are usually fairly straightforward to most students. So most students like the second, but there will be a couple exam essay questions. The essay questions in the second exam, though, are much more straightforward than the ones on the first one. So, all right, questions on that? So I can give a more detailed rubric if requested, because I'm trying to avoid sending out 40 detailed rubrics because it would kill me this time of semester. So if you got a 96.3, say, Professor, I need to know what I got wrong. Like, you missed 3.6%. Just don't worry about it. All right. So so try to avoid, unless, and that's why I already sent you yours, actually, from your email earlier today. So you should have already gotten it. Jackie, you have to email me to get it. So I'm not going to go off the chat. So if you send me a chat, that means nothing to me. I'm not a chatter. All right. So questions on that? Let's see how that works. It's going to be the same issue on paper 1. I like depth. I like students to prove that they actually understand it. And I don't like surface discussions, because that's not going to get you the jobs in this industry at all. All right. Okay. So we're working through paper 1. Hopefully you're taking notes. You got paper out, you're taking notes, right? So we're going to finish up this first article pretty quick, and then we're going to get into some others. And what we're trying to do as you're taking notes is line everything up with this rubric. What I'm going to try to do as we go forward is to try to point to which part of the rubric I'm talking about. And then what you're trying to do is organize. I don't know how you're actually going to do it, but some way to figure out how to organize it. When I did papers like this, essentially you're writing a research paper, but I've done all the research. So that's, it's a little bit unusual paper. So you don't have to go out and do a lot of research. You can if you want to add a few other things, but you really don't need to do that. This isn't go out and find 50 articles. I've already found more than 50 articles for you. So what you're trying to do is organize it. When I did research papers, I would get things on 3x5 cards by category, and then I would organize that as a paper. Well, that was back before computers. So today I try to somehow replicate those 3x5 cards somehow, maybe in Word. And so if you have the article up that I'm reading from and you see a quote or a chart that's really going to make your case, then somehow copy and paste that into Word. Anybody have an organization already that you're doing that you think is working? You see where we're going in this paper, right? It's got this massive rubric, and you need quotes, you need charts, you need data you put in as you support each one of those. Has anyone got a good organization system yet? Writing's going to be tough unless you stop me and say, hey, wait, what page number are you on there? I want that second paragraph that looks really, really good. That can work. You can certainly have what I'm looking at up on your computer, copy and paste it over, or maybe highlight it in green or something like that. Put some note over on the side, put this under transparency of prices or whatever the issue is, okay? So and if you do it right, you can get a big chunk of this paper written during the class. And that's my goal, all right? I don't want you to waste the class time because it would be a pretty tough paper to put together if you just sat and I know it's 9 o'clock, but if you just sat and let your mind wander. I actually find this stuff really, really interesting, and most students I've had in the past find it, this is an interesting topic. So even at 9 o'clock, it can work pretty well. All right. So anybody have a great system? Farrell, you got a system that's perfect yet, or are you still working on it? So I mean, you might have to look through the rubric a little bit, but as we go through things, I'm going to point out the rubric, what these issues mean, because the rubric doesn't always make sense just by itself. All right, so we're finishing up this guy whose father got really injured by this industry. So his solution, he's now getting into the solutions, right? And we've had 2 people now both say reduce insurance, reduce the government, eliminate the employer. Pretty radical stuff, right? There's not a Republican or Democrat that would say all those 3. And we saw Kamala Harris, how she got beat up in the election last year. Boy, she had to pull back on that. You tell people they're going to lose their employer health insurance, they get pretty irate, even if they may be better off in the process, all right? So pretty radical. So we should replace our current web of employer government-based insurance. And what is he saying the role of the government is? He's pretty radical. He says the government's role is catastrophic insurance. Now, what does he mean by catastrophic? What would you consider a really high deductible? Any ideas? Would 10,000 be a pretty radical deductible? How much? Well, he says 50, so you're more radical than he is, but he's talking about government stepping in when you have a bill over 50,000. After that, you pay for it out of pocket. So he's actually eliminate insurance, you pay for it out of pocket. Now, why is he saying to do that? Remember his 100 and something, whatever his 1.7 million, was that what he had? He's saying we're spending so much ridiculous money on this, but people don't notice it because the employer is paying for it. We're paying through payroll taxes. If you took all that money and just gave it back to people, they could handle that 50,000 out of pocket. So that's what he's arguing. That's pretty radical idea. What if you have, so he's saying, you're in your 20s. Yeah, you don't have 50,000 bucks, but you're going to build up to 50,000 bucks pretty quickly over 8, 9, 10 years. If you take all that money, you were spending it, But what happens if you have a major health issue? Well, you just use debt. That's his solution. Why? Because over your lifetime, you're going to have periods of time where you're building up all the excess, and other times you're going to be spending it. If it happens to you earlier, then you're going to use debt and you'll pay it off afterwards. He's essentially telling us we need to do more self-insurance. All right. I'm not saying this is my solution, but it's a pretty radical solution, especially for someone coming from the left. So he's talking about a $50,000 threshold. Chronic conditions with expected annual costs above some lower threshold would also be covered. So, you know, what do you do with diabetes and heart disease and all these kind of things that we have going on? But he's definitely saying much more out of pocket. But he's also saying much more out of the right pocket, but I'm going to be putting much more money back into your left pocket. Most people are going to be better off. A few people are going to be worse off. The government's going to step in for those that are worse off and at least cover the massive stuff, but they're still going to be worse off, right? There's almost no way to fix a system like this without someone being worse off. So how will we pay for those things? Out of our income and savings. And he's saying we'll have more savings, right? Because we're going to have all this extra money. He's also pushing, like the first article did, a health savings account. He says every American should be required to have an HSA and contribute to it, subject to a floor and a cap and dollar contributions. Now, how can we afford that? Again, he's saying, you know, you're spending all this money, so now instead of spending all this money on Medicare, on this, we can give all that money back to you, but you're going to be required to put some of it into a health savings account. All non-catastrophic would be funded out of the HSA. Account holders should be allowed to withdraw money for any purpose without penalty once the funds exceed some ceiling. And at death, it goes to your heirs. So essentially, he's requiring us to set up these accounts. Now, I'm a very cynical person, so y'all know what I think of the financial industry. So where's all this money going? It's going to go into an account charging probably 1.5%, right? So our industry would destroy something like this because we love charging high fees for nothing. So yeah, who's going to be managing this money, watching this money, and how much are they going to be charging? I still love the article I read. Chile has a really famous retirement system, and they've had really good returns historically, like 8% plus. Net of fees, it's like 3%. And you're like, wait, who's making money on Chile's retirement system? It sounds like it's the bankers and the investors. So that's a concern for me. You're going to have, anytime the government creates this thing, all this money is going to be sitting there. Boy, it's going to be really tough. People get their hands off of it. So that I would worry about that. But, you know, but there's going to be all this money sitting there. What about the care that falls through the cracks, major expenditures? These should be funded with credit. What do y'all think about that one? You have some major unexpected health crisis. Well, just borrow money. Obviously, not everybody can do that because we know credit scores are all over the place. So I'm not saying this is my proposal, but it's an interesting idea, pretty radical. Catastrophic coverage should apply with no deductible for young people, but as people age and say they should pay steadily increasing deductible for their HSA. As a result, much of end of year life would be paid through savings. Now we're going to see when we watch this video what happens to decisions about end of life care when Medicare is not paying for it, but it's coming out of savings and inheritance and out of people's pockets. Will that change behavior? We'll see. I'll be curious to see y'all's reaction to that one scene in the movie. How am I supposed to be able to afford all this? He goes back to all this money he said he found just hanging around, being wasted. So this is pretty critical, right? I wish you could sit down and walk through exactly how you calculated. Have any of y'all tried this on your own? So you got Medicaid, that's pretty heavy. Your employer's paying for your health care. For me, for UTSA, I think they pay about 12,000 a year, 12,000. Medicare is, I forget what the Medicare tax is. It's been a while since I've had to worry about that. So 2.9%, right? Why is it 2.9, not 145? You have to count the employer's contribution, right? So 2.9%. So if you're making 100,000 bucks, that's about 3,000 bucks. So for me, it's about $15,000 a year right now at UTSA. How long would it take me to get to 1.7 million? Seems like a pretty big number. So where else is he getting those numbers from? 1.7. Well, it's a family too, right? So family of four, so you're talking $60,000 a year. 20 years, yeah, that's getting there pretty quick, isn't it? It's not, doesn't take much. So family of four, there's $60,000 that you're paying. Well, you know, I'm talking about my UTSA 12,000 a year. Family probably wouldn't be 4 times that, so you can probably take some of that off. But let's say $40,000 a year. If you gave people back $40,000 a year, but told them they're going to have to pay healthcare up to $50,000 out of their pocket, it sounds like, you know, it's not that huge of a number, right? It's an extra 10,000 bucks. You're going to have to take something out for the government's catastrophe plan. That's not going to be free, but it's not going to be 2.9% of your pay, but it's not going to be free. What about the transition? How do you transition this? You have all these people on Medicare. You're going to eliminate Medicare except for catastrophes. How do you handle that? That should be an interesting, I don't know if he's thought through that. So anybody want to propose this one in your paper? Or is this too radical? All right. Catastrophic coverage should apply. Okay, we already covered that. So how do you cover all this? Coming out at 1.77 million. If you had access to those funds over your lifetime, wouldn't you be able to afford your own care? And wouldn't you consume healthcare differently? Would you make different choices if you had all that money instead of the insurance industry, instead of Medicare and the government? And then government fills the gap for lower income people. I don't know what he defines as lower income there, what percentage that would be. Some experts worry that requiring people in this part, I absolutely think he goes radically the other direction. This is the least favorite part of his entire article for me. Some experts worry that people are going to pay, well, they're going to stop doing routine care. So what does he say? Free checkups every 2 years. What does free checkups mean? When I see free checkups, that means doctors, nurses are all going to work for free. They're going to volunteer their time. Is that going to work? What does he really mean? That we're going to pay for it indirectly, right? Someone else is going to pay for it. So there's no such thing as like free college education. There's no such thing as free. I'm not going to teach college for free. So, you know, someone else is going to pay for it. President Obama made the same argument. If people don't get routine coverage, they're going to get all these diseases and going to cost us more. I don't believe that argument. We're going to talk about it when we see later. For young people, I think the checkups are a waste of money because they won't find the big stuff anyway, because they're not going to do those massive tests. And for older people, routine checkups, they find stuff that was not going to kill the person anyway. We're going to see with some of these prostate cancer, we're going to see, especially 14 men go in for prostate cancer surgery. They all come out saying this saved my life. Only one of them is right. The other 13 had unnecessary surgery. So what happens when you test all these men, you're finding all these men, they give them all these surgeries, and you're only saving 1 out of 14 of them, but the other 13 think you saved their life. You know, do you not do that and that 1 out of the 14 dies and the other 13 are much better off because then you have this surgery? It's tough. We're going to talk about this excess care that we have because of all these tests we're doing. What's the problem with the 1 and the 13? We don't know which of the 14's life is going to be saved. We can't figure that out. So we got to operate on all 14 of them and hope we save 1 of them. And then the other 13, they're thinking you saved my life, you saved my life. Instead, you didn't save their life. You just mean they're going to be in adult diapers the rest of their life, which is not all that pleasant either, right? So the surgery still did damage to them, but it might have saved their life, or it might have greatly harmed their life and didn't extend it at all. You know, so these are the kind of issues we got to look into, and that's part of the problem with routine checkups. With routine checkups, especially older people, we find stuff that we operate on that end up not extending that person's life at all. Had no impact. I mean, if your doctor says you have cancer and we're going to operate, but we know with 100% certainty that you will not die of this cancer, would you have the operation? You will not die of this cancer. You will have no symptoms. You'll never notice it, but you have cancer. Would you have this? I've had students say yes. Would you have that surgery? It's not going to kill you. You're not going to notice it. I would think no. Why would I have a surgery? But I've had students say, yeah, I'm not going to keep that in my body. But there's a lot of people out there that have cancers, didn't get the surgery. They didn't die from that. They died from something else. They're probably better off not having the surgery. I don't know what's on the chat here. Yeah, Jackie's saying no. I'm with Jackie. I agree with that. All right. So he also brings up this idea of technology. I have technology in the rubric twice. I have it under the problem and I have it under the solution. So I have it in both places. What he's arguing is technology innovation should be doing what Michael Porter was saying. Technology should increase the value equation. It should make us healthier at lower costs. That should be the goal of technology. We'll see this with the prostate cancer again. We have these new fancy machines that are incredibly expensive that look like they're much, much better and much more effective. There's no data that shows they're any better. They're any more effective, but they are definitely much more expensive. You have a hospital that spent several $1 million on a new piece of equipment. Guess what they're going to do? They're going to use it. All right. Robotics is a good example. People say, oh, these surgical robotics, they're so much better. There's no data that shows they're any better, but they're definitely a lot more expensive. He's saying we got to stop doing that. We've got to stop using technology to just increase costs without any proof of improved quality. So he uses the word value there. That's an important term. We're going to see that with Michael Porter. Remember, value is outcome versus cost. It's not just outcomes. It's outcomes versus costs. We got to somehow balance those two things. All right. So how much did it cost the hospital to kill his father? Didn't cost them anything, and instead they made over $500,000 off of giving his father this infection. Even the most casual effort to compare these prices to marginal costs or the cost of off-the-shelf components demonstrates the absurdity of these numbers. But why would his family care? They're not paying for it. She paid $992. So she's not going to be upset and say, well, how can you do this to us? It's paid by Medicare. So who paid this? We did as taxpayers, because Medicare is going to go negative here pretty soon. But how does a hospital come up with a number? And I mean, it's out to pennies, right? Why isn't it just 640,000? Why don't they just round it up? You know, so when's the last time you stayed at a hotel at $11,590 a night? I've been in one hotel that was over $1,000 a night, and it wasn't all that impressive, but it was probably a lot better than the room he was in. $7,400 for a semi-private room. You don't even get your own room. $145,000 for drugs. That's an amazing number. I mean, he was there for 5 weeks. How do you spend $145,000 on drugs in 5 weeks? I don't think a cocaine addict could do that, right? $41,000 in respiratory services. Where are these numbers coming from? How do they figure these out? So we'll get into that. This transparency of bills, where do these numbers come from? Who understands? I'm not even sure hospital CFOs understand this stuff. It's this massive, just it's a maze of things. You can feel grateful for protection currently offered by Medicare, only if you don't realize how much we spend to fund the system over your lifetime. It's not free. You're paying 3% of your pay almost for this. Would our healthcare system be so outrageously expensive if each American family directly spent even half? So he's saying we got to take more of the money that's going through all these indirect methods. We needed more of it come out of our pockets. How much would that change their behavior, and how would it change their behavior? All right, I've talked to a few of them. One is, would we exercise and be healthier? Would that be an incentive? That's the one I don't understand. You only get one body, one chance at life. I think the incentives should already be great enough to say that, hey, if I don't exercise and stay in shape, my medical bills are going to go up. I don't see how that's an additional incentive, but maybe I'm wrong on that. The second thing is you shop around for doctors, and would that change? I think that one would change. You know, we're going to see that. That's the other thing we're going to talk about in the rubric, is how amazingly different the cost of the exact same thing can be in the same city. 50 bucks, 500 bucks. If that's the case, and just coming out of your pocket, you're probably much more likely to shop around. How much shopping around do people do today? It's one decision, right? How far is it? You know, location, or maybe it's, you know, on Facebook. I need an ENT. Can someone recommend someone? Yeah. It's, how many times you seen on Facebook? I need an ENT. Oh, you recommend? Well, how expensive is she? Can you? I think she's too. You know, have you ever seen that conversation? No one cares. Insurance is paying for it. Why do I care? In fact, what do we do? And this is an amazing thing. We actually like the more expensive one, right? Because what do we assume? They're higher quality. What's the actual data show? There's no relationship between what they charge and their quality. Well, that's kind of frustrating. But we want the more expensive doctor. So he doesn't want the government's current role. He wants to shift the government to just high catastrophic events. So I'm not sure exactly what he means for Medicare. Can you imagine government doing that to Medicare and what would happen in the next election? It would be a bloodbath for whoever proposed it. Let's forget about money for a moment. Aren't we also like to get worse care in the system where providers are more accountable to insurance companies than they are to us? Imagine my father's hospital had to present the bill of care to the wife. Do you really think that that hospital forced to face the victim for that they killed, forced to collect from the customer, wouldn't have figured out how to get their doctors to wash their hands? Now you might say, oh, that's an exaggeration, but we'll see an article later that's pretty amazing on surgeons washing their hands. So I actually, there's 2 surgeries I had, that's the first thing I asked the doctor. I said, have you washed your hands? And they're like, yeah. I was like, well, have you washed them lately? But what does he think? My jerk, what are you asking me that question for? Well, it's because a high percentage of surgeons don't wash their hands because they think they're godlike, so they have no germs. So yeah, there's some amazing things. All right, so there's the second article. That's the longest of all the articles. So, all right, are y'all starting to see what we're up to here? All right, so I'll say that I don't know why what I changed. All right, here's a quick article I just want to show you. This is, you're seeing my biases that I do agree. Let's get away from the employer. Let's get away from insurance, higher deductibles, more out of pocket. I don't know if I go to the 50,000 route. If you do that, it will definitely impact women differently than men. Women's healthcare costs are higher than men's healthcare costs. So how do you address that issue? So I just throw it out there. Now, I put this on the rubric under solutions, not under the problem. The reason I did is because if the solution is higher deductibles, then you got to address how you're going to handle this particular issue. Okay. So to me, it's not part of the problem because right now men and women essentially pay about the same because of the insurance equation. But if you switch to a more out of pocket, women are definitely going to pay more. So high deductible health insurance plans favored by many employers wind up being an unfair burden to women. Largely because women need many routine medical exams that quickly add up. The median expense for men under 45 is $500. For women, it's $1,200. So it's not immaterial. It's more than twice as much. When an employer switches all of his employers to consumer-driven health plan, this is 14 years ago, and we're still not doing this. A lot of large employers have moved to this, but we still haven't gotten to it at the Affordable Care Act side. It's the same as giving women a $1,000 pay cut on average because women on average have $1,000 more in healthcare costs than men. So how do you handle that? So I've had some students say, you know, you can handle it maybe through the tax code. Maybe say, well, okay, it costs women $1,000 more, so maybe women get some break in the tax code. Some people say, well, that's true for women in healthcare, but what about men in auto insurance? Who pays more for auto insurance? Men. So maybe men pay more for auto insurance, women pay more for health insurance. What are women going to say to that? Well, men pay more for auto insurance. Why? Because they're worse drivers. So, hey, women don't pay more for health insurance because they're worse about taking care of their health. It's because they're different. So, you know, that's kind of the argument. Life insurance. Who pays more for life insurance? Men. Men die faster. Maybe that's partly their fault too. Who knows what the math is there? Women pay more for annuities. But that doesn't bother me. Why? Because they live longer, so they're going to get more money back anyway. So, but you could say it kind of all is a wash. What I'd love to see, and I don't know if anyone would touch this, but some economists to sit down and actually figure out the math of all the different types of coverages we have and what the net is. I don't know what the net would be. I don't know how much more men pay for auto insurance than women. The life insurance is a big of an issue because not all men buy life insurance, but there's probably some difference there. I would guess the net probably is women on net probably pay, you know, a few $100s more than men on a yearly basis. But I don't know the math. If it's a married couple, husband and wife, then it's somewhat of a wash, right? The man's cheaper, the woman's more. But at least address this in your paper. It doesn't take much to address this. So I've had all different answers. I don't know what other solutions there might be. If we decide it's $300 more expensive for women than men, then maybe women get a $300 tax credit every year or something. You know, who knows what solutions could be out there. But it is something to think about because it definitely has disproportionate impact. Could there be disproportionate impact on other things? What about race or nationality or ethnic? You know, there could be other impacts that you may have to think about. So, you know, but women definitely is the easiest one to measure. And insurance companies can charge women more than they charge. Can charge based on gender, so they can charge women more than men. But most employers, it's one rate for everybody. All right, questions on that one? All right, so this one I have on the rubric at the very, very, very end. Issues of healthcare costs for women versus men, but I have it under the solution section, not under the problem section. Everybody see why I have it under the solution? If you want to move it to the problem section, you can, but I think it comes up because most solutions tend to be high deductibles. All right, so let's get into this next thing. So, all right, so you have this massive thing. It's 144 pages, but I'm only asking you to read the highlight. Okay, so not only did I do the research, but I even highlighted the research for you. All right, so it's not like you got to read all these articles. All right, if you do just the highlighted, it probably cuts it 70%. Right, I don't know if you can tell, but it cuts it quite a bit. The other thing about these articles is they're dated. There's no question they're dated. The reason they're dated, I'm looking for articles constantly, but most of these articles you're going to notice happened in the first couple of years of President Obama's presidency. And why is that? Because of the Affordable Care Debate. Right? So the Economist had 5, 6, 7 articles almost every week, constantly. So I was constantly getting articles. I'm not giving you recent articles because I'm not looking. It's just there aren't as many articles out there. I've been getting recently more articles in NHS, National Health Service, NHS in Britain. I got a few of those in here. I do like to talk about the UK system, mainly because people put that up as the best system out there. And I want to show you that they have, while it is much cheaper and tends to have better results, it's not problemless. It has a lot of the serious problems, same serious problems the US have. And so there's been more of that. Why? Because of what's going on in the UK right now. So a few of those articles I added in. I have added a few new articles here, but not a whole lot. these are not out-of-date articles in a sense that the world's changed and they no longer apply. Everything in these articles is still true today because not much has really changed in the last several years, even with the Affordable Care Act. So I have it broken up in categories. Some of these articles cover more than the issue that they're under. But so I took what their main focus was, but you'll find some other things. So you will have to do some jumping around. So let's look through that. So the high cost of healthcare, that I have under the introduction to the whole paper. That to me, it just made most sense. The size of the problem, what are we talking about? So it's obviously part of the problem, but the introduction is, hey, healthcare is a massive part of our economy. It's getting bigger and bigger and bigger part of our economy over time. It's just huge. And then that first article, I also like the introduction to be a definition of healthcare versus health insurance, that a high frequency, low severity debate, and from that first article, and then the players. So that tends to be my introduction. Now, what I've had some students do when they write the paper, which doesn't really bother me, is they take the rubric and they make that the bulleted headline for each section. You can do that if you want to. It kind of, I don't think you're going to like the order I have them in. So you probably want to change the order so it makes more sense for your paper. But if you want to make that your first draft, it's just let those be. That way you make sure you at least hit everything in the rubric, okay? So the high cost of healthcare. This is my favorite big topic on the problem is overdiagnosis. We're going to talk quite a bit about that. This is where I'm going to have you watch a video, and I'll get you that video detail here pretty soon. But not only do I give you the video, but one of the students did a summary of the video, and I have his summary of the video out there. So if you're having trouble typing quotes fast enough, you can look at his summary and you might get the quotes from that. But that video does a great job talking about overdiagnosis. They talk about things like C-sections. Do we do too many C-sections in the United States? And why do they do C-sections instead of natural births? Prostate cancer. There's several of them. So there's quite a bit there. So some of it's not in the article, some of it's in that video, and that video is very, very good. I think you're going to enjoy it because it's kind of shocking and eye-opening. The quality of care in the United States. Why do we kill so many people in the United States because of medical mistakes? Why is there such a difference in quality, one place versus the other? Why does one doctor have an 18% error rate and one has a 2% error rate? And why don't we get that information out to the patients so they can make a decision? Wouldn't that be wonderful to have that information as you're making a decision? We'll talk a little bit about fraud, but not much. Incentives of the system, especially fee for service. We'll talk some about healthier lifestyles. So that's under the problem. Americans are not very healthy. What's the solution for that? How can we incentivize Americans to be healthier? And some of y'all probably have employers that are doing this. I remember the first time UTSA had two prices on their vending machines. So diet sodas were like 75 cents, sugar sodas were $1.25. And it's like, is that really going to change behavior? Now, UTSA did make smoking illegal on their campus, including smoking in your car when you're driving on campus. So I thought, wow, that's pretty right. We had a CFO that was a chain smoker, and he was gone from his office, 8-9 times a day. He was getting in his car. He had to drive off campus. Before he would just go down his car and smoke in his car and come back, but he had to drive off campus and smoke and then come back. Poor guy, I felt sorry for him, right? It's hard for a chain smoker to just stop smoking. So, but that was UTSA. They said you can't. Now, before that, they allowed smoking. I don't know if any of y'all worked in a place that allowed smoking, but UTSA had smoking break center, and you could walk by them. And when you have 100 people that all have to go to one small space to smoke, you can imagine what that looks like. It was like this major fog coming out. But that was UTSA's attempt to try to get people healthier. It's like, if you want to smoke, you can smoke. We're going to make your life miserable to do it. They pay for your gym membership, what kind of things they're doing. We're going to see here the most famous case, which is Safeway, and what they did. End of life care, that's the most touchy issue. Some of y'all might find this really uncomfortable, but we got to address that issue because that really is a big part of our healthcare costs. Lack of transparency, we talked a little about that. Consumerism, so we're getting in some of the solution. How do you get people in the United States to consume healthcare the way they consume food and energy and other things, where they're actually very, very good shoppers? Then we'll get into Michael Porter's with outcome-based medicine. We have a separate article for that we'll show. Innovations we'll talk about. There are quite a few innovations, including your iPhone. If you have an iPhone, I don't know how many of y'all use iPhones. Yeah, I know everyone in this room knows at least one person that counts their steps every day, right? Probably someone in this room counts their steps every day, right? It just goes crazy. I remember in Costa Rica, someone looked at their iPhone and it was, I forget how many it was, 60,000 steps, and they hadn't walked at all. But the roads are so bad in Costa Rica that just driving around, they had all these thousands of steps. It's like, wow, I'm in good shape today. I don't need to do my exercise. Like, no, you just been sitting there. Efficiency gains. We're going to find some amazing, there's an amazing article in here, I think, pretty amazing. This guy in India, he does something for $1,500 that costs $106,000 in the United States. And they studied the quality of his heart surgery. How does his quality of surgery stack up to the United States? Slightly better. Would you rather pay $1,600 or $106,000 if the quality is slightly higher for the $1,600? You say, I don't care. Why don't you care? Because your insurance is paying for it. Yep. That's certainly the argument on the pharmaceuticals make, right? We're paying for everybody else's pharmaceuticals in the United States. You know, that's certainly the argument. I know President Trump got into that debate quite a bit. So yeah, there's some amazing numbers out there. We're not going to talk much about the Affordable Care Act, but at least look at it as its solution. It's a very demand side solution, and let's see if we can get everybody into the system. So those are the articles. So these introductory articles are really going to focus on, you know, the cost of healthcare and what the problem is, how to fix the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, Americans to vote. Now, if you can find a more up-to-date number, you know, that's fine. 16-17% has been the case. 17% of GDP to healthcare, 9% in Britain. And yet we have 50 million Americans at the time. Now, the Affordable Care Act has definitely reduced the number of uninsured Americans. That is one of the issues, uninsured Americans. How do you handle that? I'm going to give you my radical idea on that. I got a solution that I think overnight takes you to 0 uninsured Americans, but you'll see if you like my solution. But we have 50 million today. It's much, much lower. And our life expectancy is slightly below a typical rich country. How can we spend almost twice as much, have all these uninsured Americans, and our outcomes are slightly worse than the average? That sounds pretty good. So here's, and I absolutely believe this is the biggest issue. Now, you might disagree with this. I do think it is the tax code that has caused this. Because if you look at the US versus every other country, this is the biggest difference. People say, well, it's because you have private care in the United States. Well, UK has private care, but they also have a public insurance market. But it's, to me, that's not the difference. The biggest difference is our tax code overly incentivizes employer-provided health insurance. And when you do that, what has our entire healthcare system done is they just have grown to take advantage of that massive amount of money. They're just filling in. So it's at least, it's probably well more than 200 billion debt now. It's the biggest tax break in the US tax code. So remember what it is. The employer gets a tax deduction. The employee doesn't pay any tax on it ever. That's a very, very unusual. You can't say that, but that's your 401k, your traditional Roth, your Roth IRA, I mean, your traditional IRA, your Roth IRA. You can't say that. The IRS does not do that. If the employer gets a tax deduction, someone's going to pay the tax. If it's tax-free to the employee is going to pay the tax on it sometime in the future. It fuels a healthcare inflation and it favors the rich. Why does it favor the rich? Because it's a tax incentive plan. So the higher your tax rate, the more benefit this particular tax approach has. Roughly half the population finds that their health insurance is tied to a job. That makes it hard for them to switch jobs. Healthcare inflation is one of the main reasons why the pay of Americans has stagnated. So this is why I tell students, you got to be really careful when you look at these personal income numbers. You got to ask, does personal income include healthcare? Because there's some numbers that go out there and say, well, the Americans' pay actually looks pretty good. But if you have healthcare costs that are going up dramatically, but you're not getting any more coverage, your employer is just paying more. So your employer say, hey, I gave you this huge raise. I paid for $7,000 more of your healthcare. And you say, well, how much more, I mean, health insurance, how much more healthcare do I get? No, it's the same healthcare. It just costs us $7,000 more, but we're counting that as $7,000 raise. You don't feel any richer, do you? So you have to be careful on that. And it's a huge part of compensation for employers. The system seems designed to encourage waste. Doctors are often paid for every test or invasive procedure rather than for keeping patients well. There's a pretty good quote right there for the introduction. Patients don't know what anything costs. Why? Because they don't care. And the bill will, in any case, be settled by third parties. Prices can be sky high and vary wildly. We're going to talk about this. Here's one example. Mammogram in New York can be $100 or $1,700. Which are you going to pay? Your insurance requires you to pay $50 of it. So if you go here, how much does it cost you? $50. If you go here, how much does it cost you? $50. This one's five miles closer. So what do? You spend $50 and your insurance company pays $1,700. We're going to see later, there's actually insurance companies that are saying, hey, if you go here, we'll pay you $50. So instead of paying a $50 deductible, you pay zero and we'll pay you $50 if you go and spend $100 instead of $1,700. Can that work? Can that be effective? I'll show you that website. I don't think it's up and running in San Antonio yet. But would that incentivize you? That would probably incentivize you, right? That'd be enough to get you to drive an extra 5 miles, get paid $50. Share uninsured has fallen from 18% to 13.9%. So the Affordable Care Act is having an impact. This is probably due mostly to what? The expansion of Medicaid, rather than people flocking to the exchanges. And that's a big debate, right? Because what has Texas done? They're not part of that system, right? We haven't signed up. Congress should move towards scrapping both the tax break. All right, so think about, remember what I said, you don't have to worry about the politics, but is that politically feasible? That would be a disaster. I don't know anybody running for president that's going to be their platform. Scrap the tax break. I mean, when I say scrap the tax break, that's usually not. Maybe scrap the tax break for the rich. I could see, some members of Congress wearing that on a dress someday. That would probably work. So those savings could be used to help cover subsidies for the poor. Without a tax distortion, employers would pay higher wages. We're going to see that. I'll show you the math later. What if they said, here's the money, you take the money, we won't pay for your health care anymore. Employers are already making employees pay more of their individual. Workers who has to pay the first $1,000 of his annual bill out of pocket is far more likely to shop around. Now, do you agree with that? Far more likely? It kind of depends, right? If they're paying $700 a year for healthcare and it's all coming out of their pocket, maybe. But if they're paying $20,000 a year, they still don't care, right? Because they cover their $1,000. After that, they don't care where they spend. So the government should release more data on price. I absolutely agree with that. Not governments, hospitals should release that. Why are hospitals so adamant that they not release this information? Well, they say, well, we get the most difficult cases. You're going to see that in a movie. The UCLA hospital. Well, our heart surgery, yeah, we have a worse outcome, but we're so good, we get all the hard cases. That's a perfectly legitimate argument. But is that an argument for them not to release their information to the public? I say no, they should still release the information to the public. They can put all those caveats around it. So we're going to see an article later when hospitals release data on quality, almost overnight, their qualities went up. They stopped killing as many people. It's an amazing thing. Isn't that amazing? Just reporting their quality to the public they got better. Fewer infections, fewer sponges being left inside of surgeries. So it works, it's effective, and yet hospitals fight it like crazy. The Obamacare Affordable Care Act will not be fully understood for years, and we're still not there, but it will never be the cure for the problem. Why not? Because it's so focused on the demand side. You're going to see most of the problems, or a lot of the problems on our list, from the supply side. If America wants to stick to the idea that it has a healthcare market, then it should focus on trying to make it more like a market, prices, competitors. And here they're talking about the consumer. They need you as a consumer of healthcare to be worried about prices, looking for competition, some form of choice. So you actually say, hey, I don't want to use you, you're more expensive, and I don't see any difference in your quality. But right now people don't do that. You'll see a later article that says Americans pay for healthcare with their time, not with their money. So how do you change that? Here's the National Health Services. This is in the UK. The only reason I'm putting this down is I want you to know that this is a problem globally. The US is not the only one with problems. Everybody has problems. This is ours are double. And the reason I'm arguing that is I actually think there is a solution out there that's better than what Britain's doing. I think the solution I like, obviously, remember I said I don't know what I'm talking about. So I think this stuff is so complicated. I'm sure there's stuff I haven't thought through. But I do think my solution, I think there are solutions that are better than what the Britons are doing, even though their numbers look better than everybody else's. Britons will not hear a bad word about their NHS, but its problems are becoming hard to ignore. A combination of austerity and increasing needy population has left it short. Why they have an increasing needy population? What did you write about in paper 1? Baby boomers, right? I mean, this is a problem that's just going to get massive with all the baby boomers retiring. Many hospitals are struggling. Large accident and emerging wards often fail to see 95% of patients within 4 hours. So this is the complaint you see here in the UK, is people have to wait much longer for surgeries than in the United States. You've heard that about Canada. All right, so I don't know if you'll put that in your paper, but maybe it goes in introduction. This is a global problem. Every country, there's not a country out there going, man, we got medical care covered. Now I go to UK, I go to Costa Rica a bunch. Costa Rica is often put forward as a good example country. In fact, President Obama visited Costa Rica. The guy we work with, he actually met with President Obama because he's involved in healthcare in Costa Rica. As I understand it, was President Obama and my good buddy sitting in the room talking about healthcare in Costa Rica. It is a nationalized, socialized system. It is considered high quality, relatively low cost. Sounds pretty good. And then I discovered 2 years ago its flaw. One of the farmers we work with, they had a special need daughter with serious health problems, and the system said, we can't help you. So we discovered if you have unusual problems, you're on your own. You break an arm, you have heart issues, they'll take care of you. Anything out of the ordinary, that family just was completely wiped out. I did a GoFundMe campaign here in the United States to provide them money because it just completely wiped them out. So there is no perfect system I know of. I don't know what Singapore does or some other countries. If you want to go find a country that's the perfect solution and see what they're doing, maybe there's one out there, but everybody's struggling. Do look at some of the charts because some of them are actually pretty good. They're out of date. So I would definitely give you bonus points if you can find an updated chart. They're hard to find. But if you can find it, the problem is defining healthcare spending. It's not like you can just go out to the Department of Labor and get healthcare spending. What do you mean by that? Do you include the insurance premiums? What all do you include? Do you include rehabilitation centers? So it's a tough number to come up with. I'm not even sure they calculate it accurately between countries. But just to make the point that in the United States, the cost is rising much more. But what do you notice about every country? The costs are rising, right? This isn't, you say, well, that's inflation, but why isn't this inflation? We talked about this in my last class, right? Both the numerator and the denominator are in dollars. So this is percentage of GDP. So this is not inflation driven. This is every country is seeing a sharp rise in healthcare costs. If they earn between 11,000 and 46,000, they qualify for subsidies, as well as barring insurers from charging the sick more. It requires individuals to have health insurance or pay a fine. So there's the Affordable Care Act. So what is it trying to do? It's really focused on those uninsured people. Now, most people assume the uninsured or the poor and the people without jobs. There's actually a significant part, I can't remember if I put the article in here, there's a significant part of the uninsured who can perfectly afford health insurance, and they just choose not to get it. They're young and healthy. So let's hit this issue right now, because I want y'all prepared for this next time the article comes up. Why does Congress keep saying we need young people in the system? What are they saying? There's another way of saying this. We need to rip off young people. Why do I say that's the answer? That the pay-as-you-go is part of it. But there's another issue here. I see what you're saying there. Yeah, I mean, the pay-as-you-go, Medicare is not fully funded, so it's going to come out of your hide. But what if healthcare charged you exactly what they should charge you as a young person? What would that do how does that fix the system? It doesn't do anything, does it? So why does this fix the system? There's only one way this fixes the system. If the system intentionally overcharges young people. That's the reason they need young people. They need young people to sign up because they're going to charge you way too much. Why is that okay with you? Because you're young, so way too much is still cheaper than everybody else. So you say, you should be happy. You're only spending $4,000 a year, but you should be spending what? $2,200 a year. They're going to overcharge you because you're young. So anytime a politician says we've got to get young people into the system to make it financially affordable, they're really saying we need to grossly overcharge young people so that they can subsidize part of the system that's not paying its share. Who's not paying their way? How many times can we say that? All the time. Who's the wealthier? Old people or young people? By far older people. Are there some poor old people out there that need help? Yeah. But the old people who have plenty of money are being subsidized by the young people that don't have any money. I think you should be irate every time you hear a politician say, we got to get young people into the system. If our young people say, well, charge me the right rate and I'll join the system. If you're going to overcharge me 40, 50% so you can pay for a senior citizen who has a $3.7 million Roth IRA or whatever, maybe not. So yeah, I think this should make you mad. It made me mad every time I heard it. The people at the gym was like, why are you so upset about it? So hey, you're 20 years old. You should be mad about that. He just said he's going to rip you off. So that's what the system does, is it's overcharging young people so that it can subsidize older people, and we do that all the time. But I think Social Security, Cameron's the same way. We're going to see it. I'm going to show you the article. I'm going to show how underfunded senior citizens have done for Medicare. I don't have the Social Security numbers, but for Medicare, they have. So you can have that debate, right? Your next Thanksgiving is just going to be a blast. You can tell your grandma, yeah, grandma, you're kind of about a few $100,000 underpaid on Medicare. So don't complain about, me taking your Medicare away. Why don't you pay what you owe? And you can see how that goes. And, all right. America's health system is terrible at controlling costs for two main reasons. First, insurers and Medicare usually pay doctors when they deliver many services rather than they keep patients well. We're going to talk about that pay for treatment volume. Second, America relies on a private market for doctors and insurers, yet their costs and quality remain opaque. For decades, the doctors' lobby has fought to hide detailed data. So this is a big issue we'll see over and over again. Americans cannot be consumers with healthcare because they don't have the data to be consumers. They don't know what anything costs. They don't know quality. One thing we should address up here, so this is a question people ask, why don't insurers and Medicare fight this? We're going to talk about the Medicare. Medicare is a volume issue. There's really just too many claims for them to do anything. It's mathematically impossible. Why don't insurers? Well, Insurers are what? We're going to see this later. It's a cost plus model, right? If healthcare costs go up, what do insurers do? They raise their rates. They always do that. That's the nature of the game. You have to do that. It's a cost plus model. When you have a cost plus model, what happens to your revenues when costs go up? Your revenues grow. What happens to your profits when your costs go up? Your profits go up. What's the best thing happening to insurers? Healthcare costs go up, right? If you're making 20% of revenues and your revenues grow really, really fast and your costs grow really, really fast, what happens to your net income? Your net income grows really, really fast, right? So insurers don't have that incentive, except for one thing. The employers that are buying from them, the employer has an incentive, right? So it's not the insurers that are going to fix this. It's going to be the employers demanding that insurers charge less. So you can't get this out of the insurance industry. So patients have been left in the dark when they have visited the doctor. They have no idea what anything costs, or that is all ultimately comes out of their wages. So they have not objected when doctors give them unnecessary tests or overcharged. A prostate-specific antigen test in Philadelphia could cost $20 or $407. So some students miss this on the rubric. I have it in one place. I probably should separate it, but I can find it. Here it is. There's two words in there, cost and quality. Some students only talk about cost, some only talk about quality. I want you to get them both in there. I should probably do it as two different ones, but there's inconsistent cost, inconsistent quality, and the amazing thing is there's no correlation. It's not high cost has high quality, low cost is low quality. That's not it at all. It's high cost, it's low cost, it's all over the place. So, they found that the rates of compliance with cesarean deliveries varied nearly 5-fold among American hospitals. Does that make sense? There's some places, wow, you should have 5 times more C-sections than other places. Doesn't make any sense at all. And we're going to see an article on that. And they talk about that in the video too. They're actually getting that quite a bit of detail. So here's another chart you might use. This is on page 9. A mammogram in New York. PSA test. Dermatologists. And why are dermatologists such a thin line? Not covered by insurance. Dermatologists, especially the, well, their biggest customer is what? Aging Americans. Try to make 80-year-olds look like they're 60-year-olds. But it's not covered by insurance. Isn't that amazing? I mean, that's like one chart tells an incredible story, doesn't it? And there are some cities like Cincinnati that it's not so wide. We're gonna, in that video, you're gonna talk about Cincinnati. They're gonna talk about why are there a few places that are so much better than the rest of the United States? What are they doing different? And that video is actually interviewing. It's pretty hilarious because they interview these 2 hospitals that have it right. And then they interview that UCLA hospital that their numbers are just all messed up. And every time they interview that guy, I mean, it's like, he's got this smirk on his face, like, yeah, we're pretty bad, aren't we? But he comes up with some excuse why they're not so bad. And it's like painful after a while. These insurers have given reams of data to Independent Research Center. Next year, it will launch a website where any insured patient can log in. So people are trying this, but it just never takes off. And when's the last time you know someone that went to the hospital and the first thing they did was go online to check the quality of the hospital? And there's surveys. The survey I love the best is they ask nurses, would you have a surgery here? That's probably the best survey you can do. Would you want to go to a hospital that the nurses, I would never have surgery here? Probably not, right? So nurses probably know more than anybody else. And there are surveys of that, and that would be great information to put out there. All right, here's another one at NHS. The taxpayer-funded service, which provides healthcare free at the point of use, is so precious to public imagination that politicians are less likely to talk of improving NHS than protecting it. Overall, the service faces a funding gap of $20 billion by the end of the decade. Doctors have gone on strike over a new, less generous contract, and everywhere hospitals are struggling to make ends meet. This is the UK. This is the system right? He says, hey, here's the one that's working. The diagnosis is simple. Rising. If I didn't tell you what this was about, you would assume this is an article about the United States, wouldn't you? Rising demand for healthcare from an aging population is outstripping supply. That sounds like the United States, and it is, but it's also the UK. Will require a far more ruthless focus on efficiency. Managing demand will involve not just uncontroversial measures such as more emphasis on preventative, but toxic ones such as introducing charges for service that have been free. Again, there's that word free. I hate the word free when it's not free. By scaling up, NHS could offer better care for the same money. Countries such as Germany and Denmark have found that by reducing the number of hospitals that offer particular surgical procedures, they can reduce the incidence of complications. Okay, we're going to talk about this. This is Michael Porter's solution. He wants you to travel much further for certain types of surgeries. There should only be 4 or 5 hospitals that do those surgeries. They do 40,000 of them a year. Their error rates are extremely low. You don't want to go to some community cost hospital and the doctor's like, yeah, I've done this 3 times already. And I think this time I might get it right. That's not what you want. You want doctors that do these so frequently. And you find 2 things. The error rates go down and the cost is lower because they're spreading their costs over many more. Now, do you want to have to fly somewhere for a surgery or drive 5 hours for a surgery? Well, if the error rate goes from 18% to 2%, you might be willing to do that. So that is part of the solution. We're going to see this concentration of services, specialization on certain things. Britain already spends less as a share of GDP. It's on a course to shrink that share from 7% down to 6%. So the US, they're getting even better. At a time of steeply rising demand, that is unrealistic. Politicians must make plain voters that if they want to keep this model and expect to carry it on living into their 80s, they're going to have to pay for it. Patients should, where possible, be diverted from expensive forms of care to cheaper ones. We're going to talk a lot about that. But what's the problem here? Who votes? These are the people that vote, right? Your age group doesn't vote. So what do old people do? They vote to have you pay for more stuff. That's the easiest solution. You guys don't complain about it. Why don't y'all complain about it? There's going to come a point where y'all just can't take it anymore. I still remember, I was watching TV in the early 80s, and President Reagan proposed something that was going to increase costs on Medicare, not dramatically, but increase costs on Medicare. And there was this long line of Cadillacs, brand new Cadillacs, driving on Washington, D.C. All these old, y'all don't know Cadillacs, but there was a time where everybody over 60, their goal was to buy a Cadillac. And you're looking at these quite wealthy people in these very expensive cars, and they're protesting because they're going to pay a little bit more for Medicare. That's what you're up against in your generation. And to me, it's kind of scary. And I'll be there voting too for, keep paying me, guys. I'm 65 years old. I don't want to pay for it. It makes no sense to use hospitals as expensive substitutes for old people homes. We're going to get into that. That's a touchy issue, right? More fundamentally, the focus must shift away from treating to preventing. 70%. Now, I don't know where they get these numbers. Who knows where they get them? We all know these numbers come from a group that the higher the number, better for them. So there's incentives on the statistics as well. So all statistics are wrong. All statisticians lie, but let's take it for what it is. 70% of his spending is on long-term illnesses, cheaper as well as better for patients to reduce obesity, for diabetes. Providers are paid for the procedures, not for rendering that they render unnecessary. So I think this could be a big part of the solution in your paper. What do we pay for and what do we not pay for? Do you pay for health gyms, dietitians, those type of things? And the question is, will it work? Can you have someone who has, alcohol, eating, smoking, all those kind of things? Are there things you can do to actually change their behavior? So what can you do to change behavior? I was in my 20s. I did that, gain 40 pounds in your 20s. It's hard not to. Why? Because you're so active in high school and college, and then you get that first desk job. When I turned 30, I was like, my goal was never buy another pair of pants larger than the ones I'm currently wearing. That was my goal in life. And when I hit 30, I missed that. I was wearing, I gained a lot of weight, and I said, I can't do it. I remember January 1st, after my 30th birthday, I got on a bike and I just started riding. Because it's easier in your 30s than it is in your 40s and 50s and 60s. But can you take someone in their 60s and 70s that hasn't done that their whole life and suddenly change behavior? Do you think that's possible? And what would it take to do that? And it's tough, right? Your whole life, it's just hard. I love that story about this lady, senior citizen lady. She decided one day to start doing running, and then she started doing senior Olympics, and she'd never been an athlete her entire life, and she's now winning these marathons in her age group. And I was like, man, that's cool. I really love that. All right, NHS providers are paid for the procedures. A better model will be give health providers a budget. So we're going to definitely talk about this. This is the Michael Porter's model. We pay health providers for outcomes, not for treatment. Say, okay, you're responsible for San Antonio. We're going to measure you on how healthy San Antonio is. And that will be the basis of your pay. We're not going to pay you for how many heart transplants you do or how many diabetes you get. We're going to pay you based on how much healthier San Antonio is. And doctors are going to say, well, I can't get them to take their medicine. Well, you better figure out a way to get them to take their medicines. I can't get them to the gym. Well, you better figure out how to get them to the gym, because that's how you're going to be paid. That's pretty intriguing, isn't it? How do you do that? This would increase incentives to use new technology to give patients more responsibility for their own health. But that's my big question. Is it actually going to work? All right. What more incentive do you need than it's your life and your body, right? I don't quite understand that. But I let it get out of my control in my 20s. So it's not easy. Right? We got food everywhere, right? Isn't that the problem? We're so unhealthy food, cornstarch, all this kind of stuff. I brought a big thing of sugar this last class. There's a lady at my church, every Sunday morning, she's got these cinnamon buns that are like Cinnabon times 2 on the calories. And she's like really offended if you don't eat one. It's like, sorry, I don't need the sugar. He said, oh, you hate me. He's like, no, I just don't want to eat that. All right, we'll start here next time. Are y'all taking notes? So y'all got it figured out? All right, this is key, or this paper is going to be a pain. So we're talking through this problems with healthcare, some of the issues. We've done a little bit of discussion of the NHS. This is another article. NHS accident emergency. NHS is a mess. So you have to ask, if this is the best system in the entire world and it's a mess, what can we say about everything else? Reformers believe that new models of healthcare, many pioneered in other countries, can fix it. So they're getting to this Michael Porter stuff. Oh, sorry. Sorry about that. Check real quick on it. Did I miss anybody? Marcus. Someone else came in. Who was it? Just came in. I got Lance. Lance, were you the last one in before Marcus? Well, if you're on Zoom, you have to submit notes to get credit. All right. Okay, so let's talk about the challenges. This sounds a lot like your paper one. As far more people enter and live longer in their dotage. I love that word. How often do you use that word? The Economist has some great terms we don't use too often. Demand increases for 2 costly types of care, looking after the dying. About 25% of all hospital inpatient spending during a person's lifetimes occurs in the last 3 months. That's a pretty mess. So a lot of students, they get to the one issue, the end of life care, and they give me like, half a sentence. It's hardly anything there. There's a great sentence to put on that end of life care. 25% of inpatient. Now this is NHS, so it may not apply to US, but the US is somewhat similar. It's probably even higher in the US. So that's the first thing, is we're spending a lot of money keeping people alive at the end of their life, even if there's not much hope of them surviving. The second is caring for those with chronic conditions. So chronic conditions is a huge issue. We're going to talk a little bit about that. That's somewhat tied to the fact that we're living longer and also to our lifestyles. About 70% of NHS spending goes on long-term illnesses. And that's true in the US as well. You want to guess what they are in the US? What do you think top three are? I think we're going to see the top three in here in the US. I can't remember exactly what the list is. Where do you think diabetes ranks? Top three? Heart disease. Cancer, you might be surprised. Cancer may not be as high as you might think it is. There's one that I was surprised is a really high one in the US. Asthma is a really big one in the US, especially more with children. So we got a comment in here. Well, obesity, Cameron is correct, but obesity is related to these, but it's not necessarily an illness itself. So yeah, obesity certainly drives diabetes and heart disease, but it's itself not an ailment. All right. To fix the NHS requires changes in three areas: funding, efficiency, and reducing unnecessary treatments. We're going to certainly get into unnecessary treatments. That's going to be probably the biggest part of the problem we're going to see. There's a more radical option: ditch the taxpayer-funded model altogether and replace it with health insurance. There's no way they're going to do that in the UK. There's an Economist article this week about how you touch my NHS and you're done. You'll never survive another election. And no politician's going to touch it. It'd be kind of like touching Medicare in the United States. Most hospitals still don't know what they buy, how much they buy, and what they pay for goods and services. There is a huge variation in costs and outcomes. Now, again, this is the UK, this isn't the US. For hip replacements, hospitals pay between $788 and $1,590 for similar prosthetics. Rates of deep wound infection and avoidable complication vary from 0.5% to 4%, so they have the same issue with quality. Reducing the average to 1% would improve the lives of 6,000 patients per year and save 300 million pounds, or 300,000 pounds. I don't know which that is. I don't know how the UK does M's. If M is million or M is thousand. But the NHS tariff system rewards repeat activity rather than innovation. Again, it gets back to a treatment over wellness. A surgeon at Alder Hey Hospital wanted to use Skype to show parents remotely how to remove their children's dressings, yet he was prevented from doing so because the tariff price for telemedicine consultation was too high, was too low. Patients instead came into the hospital for expensive treatment. So you got to change the regulations. One of the things we have under the problems is this is a heavy regulated industry. It prevents innovation. So I think I told y'all before, but my oncologists, they kept apologizing to me for doing a Zoom doctor's visit. It's like, yeah, this is what I prefer this. Why can't I do this forever and ever? Oh, don't worry. Once COVID's done, you can come back. You can drive all the way over here and visit with us. Like, I don't really want to. The English NHS is the biggest employer in Europe. It employs 1.5 million people, or 5% of England's workforce. There are too many hospitals. We're going to see that, especially with Michael Porter. We need to eliminate the community hospital. We need to be going to much bigger, community hospitals should be emergency care facilities. They shouldn't be doing cancer surgery and stents and back surgery. They shouldn't be doing that kind of stuff. People can drive to these other hospitals and get treatment. Across the world, hospital chains are scaling up. Specialized care is better at scale. Surgery is about practice and volume. There's a great quote. You may have to get the guy's name. That applies to the US as well. Now, they're not saying that we need more specialists to do special, it's not like, so we're gonna have to, that balance, but we're talking about to the extent that we're gonna have these very intricate specialized surgeries, we need hospitals that's all they do, and they're very, very good at it. And there's only 2 or 3 of them in the country. That's what we're talking about. They have a supply problem. The GP system, so it can cope with rising demand, require it to move away from its artisan model, embrace technology, working more closely with hospitals and other parts of the health service. This is an issue in the United States. It's how to get more people to become doctors, especially general practitioners. We have a shortage of doctors in this country. I don't know if y'all have done the math. Y'all have pre-med friends? It's, people say, oh, you're a doctor, you must be really wealthy. And you can't really say that anymore. They may be well off, but these aren't, the wealthiest people in the world. My sister-in-law is a doctor, and they're doing okay, but boy, they're not like rolling in dough doing it. It's an expensive career. It takes a long time to get started. Okay, we're going to see this ACOs in the US as well, accountable care organizations. You're trying to organize groups so that they're based on outcomes. We talked about this last class, that we base on outcomes, not activities. Make sure that's somewhere in your paper. It's almost going to have to be when you get to the Porter section. Outcomes, not activities. That sounds really wonderful, but it's much harder to implement than it is to say it. It's given a budget. Look at this. I mean, it's just kind of radical. It's given a budget adjusted for the health of population. So if you got a population like in Florida, they're very aged, they got a lot of diabetes, health disease. So you're going to adjust the budget given that group. And then they're going to be given some targets. You need to improve here. You need to improve here. You got to get your people in diabetes to exercise, eat better. All right. And say, well, that's not my responsibility. Well, it is now. You got to figure out, well, you know what? We have a nurse practitioner, call them once a month. That has a huge impact. Well, then start doing that. All right. Well, what's my incentive for that? Well, you have fewer people in diabetes. You have fewer drugs. You're going to get paid more. You see how that drives innovation? You're focused on the patient. You're not focused on treatments. It really changes it. Here's a great quote. Wouldn't this be great to put in your paper? Move from volume to value. And remember the definition of value. How healthy we are versus the cost to provide it. Move from volume to value. So that's why, I was joking about, try to keep the word incentive out of your paper. I was joking. This is all about incentives. How do you change the incentives so that people are focused on outcomes and not focused on how many treatments they do? ALCs were part of Obamacare, part of the Affordable Care Act. I don't think they're working as well as they intended because of just the regulatory red tape and other things. There was, in fact, The Economist had a few articles, and we may see a few of them. There was some early, really exciting things going on where these things look like they may be working, but you get into the grind, and especially you get into Medicare and all of its bureaucracy, these things tended to just die down over time. All right, let's talk about the high cost of healthcare. America's hospitals are the most expensive part of the world's most expensive health system. So hospitals are a huge part of this. You're definitely going to see that in a video. I'm somewhat waiting on the video until you get paper 1 in, but I'll probably give you the link to it this weekend so you can watch it. So this is the biggest part. And so that video is really going around and talking to hospitals, because that really is what's driving the cost. Trying to drive patients out of its hospitals in the clinics. America has more than 5,700 hospitals, with nonprofits outnumbering profits. So you think, well, that should be good, right? Not-for-profit hospitals, but the problems with them are just as bad as the problems with profits. This is not a problem that's driven by greedy, profit-hungry capitalists. It's really not at all. Most of these share a familiar business model, sell as many services as possible at the highest price. Doctors receive a fee for each treatment, so there are few financial incentives to keep patients well. You're going to see in this video, it's really a stark comment from one of the doctors. He says, I get paid more if I harm my patients. That's a pretty scary thing here. I don't know if that's a direct quote, but it's pretty close. Now, does he actually do that? Well, he's at one of the better hospitals. But he says, there's things that I can do that make the lives of my patients better that harm the finances of my hospital. And I get in trouble if I do that. That's not a good model. Here's a good chart to put. US hospitals, this is per night. Average hospital cost per patient per night. These are 10 years old, so I don't have the more update numbers. US is more than twice the next most expensive. Employers have increasingly required workers to make out-of-pocket contributions toward their health care, which makes them a bit less likely to seek treatments. So then that gets back to higher deductibles. Is that going to change behavior? That's going to be a big part of it. We're going to talk about that much more later. So there is something in the Affordable Care Act related to quality. I don't think it had enough teeth. I don't think it was nearly extensive enough. I remember I was on a project when I was at UTSA. We were trying to automate all of our healthcare stuff. We just wanted everything, instead of all this paperwork going back and forth, let's just convert everything to electronics. All these companies from around the US got together on this big project, and the whole project was shut down. And they said, we can't do anything until Medicare makes up its mind. Medicare's got to tell us what the technology standards are, what formats we're going to use. If Medicare would sit down and say, here's the rules, it could solve a lot of problems, and they just won't do it for some reason. Same thing on quality and quantity, all these rules. Now, we saw earlier when Medicare changes the rules, hospitals find ways to get around them. And Medicare is very, very weak. We're going to see in one article I'm going to show you is very weak, mainly because it's just overwhelmed with quantity. They've got more than they can handle. They don't have time to really mess with this stuff. They're just trying to keep the engines running. So it's Medicare is a huge part of this equation. Groups of doctors and hospitals can apply to be designated ACOs, which will be awarded for keeping the cost of Medicare patients' treatments below a certain level. But it's just not working the way it was designed. It was a great idea, it made a lot of sense, but it's just the bureaucracy is just overwhelming everything else. It is a move away from fee-for-service model. How can a hospital profit from delivering fewer services when it's organized to deliver more? Record it for keeping patients well. Ensure that patients do not suffer expensive relapses. Nurses can scroll through records to confirm that patients have collected their prescriptions and had their checkups. More home visits are being made. Now, that's pretty. When I was a little kid, there was a TV show called Dr. Welby, MD. Y'all probably never heard of that program. Go ask your grandparents. Have you heard of Dr. Welby? He was a really famous TV show. But a doctor that went around and visited all his patients in their homes. We're moving back to that. Here we are 60 years later, we're moving back to that. Why is that? Well, because your focus is on getting this person so that they're well, so they don't have to come to the hospital. So if they don't come to the hospital, you go to them so they don't come to the hospital. They see a nurse practitioner, which is a lot cheaper than a surgeon. Yeah, overall, you save a lot of money and the patient is healthier. All right, so this is going to be a little bit shocking, I think. You may not know, well, y'all don't see this as much, but a lack of market competition has allowed hospitals to thrive while patients get hit with exorbitant, unexpected, unfair bills. These are called surprise bills. Some of these are pretty shocking. Elizabeth was struck with a bill for $17,850 because a physician asked her to provide a urine sample. She didn't know that the doctor's testing lab was out of her insurance network. Her insurer, which would have paid for an in-network lab at $101, refused to cover the bill at all, fearing that for his daughter's credit rating, her father bargained the bill down to $5,000. She could have paid $101. Her insurance company could have paid $101. But she ended up paying $5,000. Does it make sense to charge someone $17,850 for a urine sample? That seems a little out of whack, doesn't it? Tens of thousands of families who receive surprise, and this is the term, surprise medical bills So one of the things on the list on the rubric is lack of transparency, and this is that lack of transparency. Most people, when they go to the hospital, go to the doctor, they say, I have insurance, I don't care about what it costs. And then they end up having to pay thousands of dollars because they didn't realize they were out of network. I'm going to show you, there's some articles here that is incredibly shocking. 22% of patients receive bills they did not expect. McAllen, Texas, which is one of the worst case scenarios they give in these articles. Well, you even say it here, already infamous for being the highest cost county in the US for Medicare. Any of y'all from McAllen, Texas? So congratulations. Number one, we're especially unlucky. 89% of them received balance bills from doctors who didn't take their insurance, even though the hospitals they visited did. How in the world is that possible? You go to a hospital that accepts your insurance and you get a bill from a doctor that's not in that network. And you're going to see some of these doctors are intentionally not employees of that hospital, so they're not in network, so they can send surprise bills. Does that sound ethical to you? Peter Dreyer, who needed neck surgery, received $117,000. I'm not talking, a $700 bill you weren't expecting. 117. How many Americans can receive a $117,000 bill they weren't expecting? From an assistant surgeon he hadn't known about or even met. The assistant surgeon's charge was almost 20 times the $6,200 fee charged by their primary surgeon. Who is this person? What did they do? Don't you think Peter should have the right to know what that person is doing and maybe say, I don't think we need his assistance. What did he do? Well, he was walking down the hall and he happened to walk into the surgery and observed it for a few minutes. Oh, and that's $117,000. Okay, thanks. When did Peter find out about that surgeon? He may not, one of the reasons he may not have ever met this person is he may have been out the entire time. The decision for this surgeon to do something was made when he was unconscious. Name me any other business anywhere in the world that's the way they do business. That is pretty shocking. The hospital physician may charge $3,000 for a surgeon, but the insurer will disallow a huge chunk of that. The real price is $750. The $3,000 is a fictional price plucked out of thin air. So insurance companies know how to play the game, and they're going to fight for you. But if you're out of network, they don't care. You're not their problem. But when an out-of-network provider bills a patient, no discount is applied. The insurer then pays the same $750, leaving the patient responsible for everything else. The out-of-network provider has no duty to accept the insurer's payment. The phony made-up price suddenly becomes the real price. The AMA, the real crux of the problem is that health insurers are refusing to pay fair market rates. So the AMA is kind of defending the hospitals. Insurers in turn accuse doctors of price gouging and hospitals of being complicit. It's the hospital's responsibility to contend to ensure that all physicians treating patients in their facility are covered by the same insurance contracts as the hospital. Any of y'all think of that before? You're going to the hospital for a surgery. Oh, I need to check and make sure every single person who interacts with me is in my network. Wouldn't you assume if the hospital's in your network that you're covered? I mean, think about this. I picked on the life insurance industry, and I do really think it's a problem. But here's someone at a pretty serious part of their life, right? They're pretty stressed out, going through surgery, something pretty serious, and all this stuff's going on. Can you blame them not worrying about this? They're worried about their life, and then at the end of it, they end up with this just kind of being beat up at the other side. You can see some on the chat. Yeah, you can fight with them. This array is saying you can. Yeah, you definitely can. They'll probably negotiate down. To make matters even worse, these doctors gain by remaining independent. They can still collect in-network payments from insurers, and they can extract additional dollars from patients by balance billing too. Refusing to join insurance networks is a dominant strategy for independent physicians. And the most common is this anesthesiologist. And that one you would just assume would be in network, but so pretty shocking. Remember, one of these things is supply creates its own demand. If you can just walk in and say, hey, let me observe your surgery for a while, and then you can charge them, a few $1,000s. There's a few other examples here you're going to see that are pretty, some of them are kind of comical. One guy got charged for something to help him put his socks on, and he doesn't remember ever putting his socks on, and he didn't really want to spend all that money for contraction he didn't need. Americans pay twice as much as Canadians for healthcare, but they didn't get twice the benefit. A new study of patients with advanced colorectal cancer who lived in some cases mere miles from each other. So the border made a huge difference. A total of about 12,345 was spent a month on the cancer patients in his study who lived in Western Washington. The monthly spending in British Columbia was half of that. American patients with advanced cancer survived 21 months, 21.4. In Colombia is 22.1. So they paid half as much and got slightly better outcomes. That sounds like a pretty good deal, right? Now, why do they always say about Canada, you're going to wait a long time. You may not get in to see a doctor. You can debate whether that statistics is true or not. There's probably some of that. If Medicare, being the largest payer for medication, could negotiate drug prices, the cost would go down overall, even for what private insurers pay. Y'all saw this. President Trump talked a lot about that. Under current policy, the U.S. Health and Human Services Secretary is explicitly forbidden from negotiating directly with drug makers on behalf of people enrolled in Medicare Part D, the program's prescription plan. Medicare accounted for 29% of spending at drugstores in 2016. Donald Trump has repeatedly criticized the policy, and most Americans want it changed, according to a recent poll. Why hasn't it been changed? This is the biggest lobbyist group there is, and they give a lot of money to Congress men and women. I don't think I have it in my notes, but I thought it was interesting. In the Affordable Care Act, they wanted to do some outcome-based medicine. So they funded, I think it was $1 billion for outcome-based medicine study. They wanted to see, a good example is knee surgery. There's studies that shown that people with knee surgeries are no better off 5 years later than people who didn't do knee surgery and just did rehab. So knee surgery is several $1,000s, the rehab's a few $100s, and the two are exactly the same. So which should Medicare pay for? If you as a taxpayer, they're exactly the same outcome. One costs $12,000, one costs $1,000. What should Medicare pay for? They should pay the $1,000. What the Affordable Care Act said, you can do the $1 billion study. You're not allowed legally to use any of the information from that study when it comes to what Medicare can and cannot pay. That seems pretty crazy, right? But that's what they decided. Why? Because there's a strong lobby group there. Other factors that drive a high price, lack of price transparency. I've been giving you some examples of that. Patients don't know what they're paying for until they get the bill. Prices of hospitals vary widely, sometimes even in the same zip code. If patients knew what things cost, they might shop around. There again, that's the key, right? How do we get patients to shop around? Administrative costs of healthcare are high, sometimes accounting for 25% of U.S. hospital spending, more than twice the hospitals in Canada. Why? Because of the heavy regulation. It's fractured, meaning doctors often spend a lot of time on administrative tasks like filling out paperwork. And insurance, this is the side now. It said on insurance, anytime you use insurance, automatic increases cost 25%. But I understated that, didn't I? Because what else does insurance do? It increases the cost of hospitals and doctors as well. So there's additional cost. I've never bought dental insurance. So when I get my teeth cleaned, I just hand them my credit card and I'll leave. If I had insurance, there's this massive amount of paperwork that they do. The costs are just, it adds a lot of costs. Canadian hospitals get lump sum budget that covers these costs of care. Okay, there's more here. We're actually going to see a little more on these kind of things. All right, this is my favorite topic. So up to that point, you see where we're going in the rubric. Let's look at a few of these. Technology example is distortions. We'll get a little bit more on that in the video. Health insurance tied to employment, we've already talked about that. The tax treatment, we've talked about that. The inefficiency of the insurance model, what do I mean there? We already talked about that. Severity, frequency, right? You don't want to use insurance unless you have to. It should be reserved for very low frequency, high severity events. The insurance model is not ideal for paying normal things. It's really, really, really good for low frequency, high severity events. Why? Because the low frequency means a lot of people paying a premium. You get a lot of money, and you can take that lot of money and pay some really massive bills for this very small percentage that needs something. It's a good model from that way. You get a lot of heft for a little bit. You know, a small percentage needs it, but it does not work. It's really quite stupid to use it for high frequency events because you're just adding cost. For medical care quality, we're going to talk about that much more. Medical malpractice, we'll talk later. We talked a little bit about excessive regulation. We'll get into that more. So focus on treatment over prevention. I've given you some pretty good quotes there. That's closely related to our next topic, which is, you notice on the next topic, I have it is twice as much points. I should probably make it 4 times as many points. I do think it's a key topic. All right. So you see how we're kind of working through these. Are y'all getting? I'm worried some of y'all are just sitting there, you know, staring at me. So make sure you're getting your paper written right now. All right. You got to get these quotes, this data into the section that you're writing about, and it's going to be tough to do. It's the other reason why I'm stopping every once in a while to kind of give you a chance to catch up. Complexity of system, lack of price transparency. That's where these surprise bills could certainly fit in that discussion. Some of the quotes we had from there would certainly fit there. All right, so I'm going to jump back. Comments, questions, are we doing all right? I can visualize how I'd be doing the paper if I were you, but you got to find your own system. All right, overdiagnosis. Boy, I love this topic. All right, so here's where I wish President Obama could come in and we could kind of discuss this and debate it. He's a lot smarter than I am, and he had a lot more access to a lot more information than I had because he's the president of the United States, right? So as the president of the United States, he had all these experts coming. I don't have that. I don't have a presidential group of people following me around and giving me all this data. I'd still love to have the discussion and debate. So his argument is we've got to pay for doctor visits, checkups, because it's a pay me now or pay me later. All right, that's his argument. I remember watching him on CNN. I think I was at the airport making that argument. If we don't do that, we're going to end up paying more in the long term. I disagree with that. All right, here's my argument. I mean, if you have to choose between the two of us, go with him. But here, I'm going to still try to convince you here. So with young people, I don't think you're going to find anything anyway. With older people, you're going to find stuff that you wish you hadn't found because they would have been better off if you hadn't found it. All right, those are my two extremes. So let's see what the actual data says. The notion that evidence might be used to limit care remains heretical. I just talked about that. All right, the Republican Party did this during the Affordable Care Act. They had these commercials of elderly women in wheelchairs being thrown off the side of cliffs. Now, I think they were actors. I don't think they actually harmed anyone in the commercials. But this is what they were saying. They called it, have y'all heard this term? Everybody remember that term? Was that before y'all's time? This is 34. Death panel. What do they mean by death panels? So you're going to have some group, some bureaucratic group that's going to say, this is covered, this is not covered. And, you know, they're going to let my grandma die because they're not going to cover this experimental treatment and it could have saved her life. We got these death panels. What do they do in the UK? They say, this is covered and this is not covered. And what if you say, I still want that? They say, tough luck, it's not covered. In the UK, they're adamant what they cover and don't cover. So in the US, we don't buy that. This should be between the patient and the doctor. If there's some experimental drug, it costs $100,000 and it's got a 0.3% chance of saving them, then we should try it and see how it goes. Yeah. About 1/3 of that spending is waste. You're going to see this number quite a bit. Now, the one book I'm going to show you, the 1/3 is the bottom of the range. They say 1/3 to half is waste. We don't really know what that is because there's almost no way to measure it. And some of that 1/3 waste is people that get the surgery and we don't know if the surgery saved their lives or not. We just know on average, 1 out of 10 his life is saved, 9 out of 10 it was an unnecessary surgery. We don't know which is which. So do you call that waste or not? So we'll have to talk through that. America has a unique distaste for evidence. This is a big part of this overdiagnosis. You're going to see it in the video quite a bit. Mr. Obama's stimulus and health law included more than $1 billion. Well, here it is right there. I didn't realize I had the article. Here it is right here. Explicitly barred studying cost effectiveness. Does that make sense to anybody? So the death penalty things, they're worried they're gonna, they're gonna throw you into your grave because this death panel says you can't have this treatment. So let's say there's a treatment, it saves 1 out of 1,000 people. It costs $100,000. Should Medicare be able to say, no, we're not paying for that? Right? That's something you have to address in your paper. What if you were the 1 person in 1,000 that would have saved? My feeling is, I'll give you my biases, and you can certainly disagree. I almost like it more if you disagree with me in your paper, but don't try to disagree with me in your paper, because then you'd be forcing yourself to argue me stuff you might not agree with. But my opinion is, I don't like the UK approach that if someone wants that, they should be able to get it. But if they want it and it's not cost effective, they should have to pay for it themselves. So my opinion is, Medicare says, you know what, knee surgeries are not as effective as a rehab. We're not going to cover knee surgery, but if you want knee surgery, go get it, and you can pay for it yourself. That's my approach. We need someone to protect us as taxpayers. So if the studies say that's effective, that's not effective, this is cheaper, that's more expensive, we will cover this, we won't cover this, have at it if you want it. Okay, that's my approach. You have to figure out what you think makes sense. That's not the UK approach. UK approach is you cannot have it. Even if you pay for it yourself, it's not yours. The task force on lease had torn a fury. This is an interesting one, mammograms. They recommended against mammograms for women in their 40s. That makes people irate. When that study came out, boy, they were irate. But what did they discover? They discovered mammograms for women in their 40s did more harm to women than it helped them. That's what their studies found. They advised against routine PSA tests to screen prostate cancer. Why? Because their study shows that harms more men than it helps. The panel explained that for every life the test saved to treatment inspired by those tests would have caused 1 man to develop serious blood clot, 2 to have heart attacks, and at least 30 to become impotent or incontinent. So you're going to save 1 life. And this is the rest. So does the recommendation make sense? This test is causing, how many people is that? 1, 2, 3. So you're going to save 1 man and you're going to really mess up the lives of 33. I don't know how many of those 33 are going to die. 30 of them won't die, but they're going to have a much lower quality life. Blood clot, you won't die from that, but it's serious. You could, right? 2 are going to have heart attacks. You could certainly die from that. So does that math make sense or not? It could be that you say you can get your PSA and you can get the surgery, but we're not going to pay for it. That might be a little draconian, but so you see these issues you have to deal with. Who should be making, and then part of your paper you're only going to talk about is who should make these decisions. So you say, well, it should be between the patient and the doctor. All right, well, what's the doctor thinking? Do I do the surgery or not do the surgery? Do I make $3,000 or not make $3,000? Is that the right person to be making these decisions? And what about the patient? What the patient saying? My doctor just told me I need this surgery to save my life. What's the patient's decision? Has the patient been given full information? This sounds like life insurance, doesn't it? All over again. What do we call that? Asymmetric information, right? So you have to deal with these. Think about it with your own life. How should these decisions be made? Anybody want to argue a particular point on that yet, or y'all still letting this sink in? You see what President Obama was up against, right? These are not easy. Hillary Clinton. I was really shocked with the Republican Party. They finally get the presidency, both houses. They're going to undo Affordable Care Act. And they're like, oh, wait, we haven't thought of anything. We don't have anything proposed or present. That's pretty amazing, isn't it? They finally got their time to go, and they're like, yeah, we don't really have a clue what to do. Why? Because now they're on the attackee side. You can see how whatever you do, it's so easy to attack. And they're like, you know what? We're not touching it. We'll just kind of talk about it. So this is something politicians hate, because there are no solutions that don't upset people. Over-tested when cancer isn't cancer. So this is the question I asked last time. Someone says you have cancer, should you have surgery? Most people have to their heads, well, of course, but maybe not. You can't tell me I have prostate cancer and that you're going to just watch it. You're going to see it in the video. You're going to see one guy that I cannot stand in this video. I'm sorry. There's something about this guy. I bet you're going to tell which one it is when you see him. Boy, he just irritates me. But anyway, that was his approach. It's, you tell me you have cancer, you're not going to operate on me. Of course you're going to operate on me. But you're going to see another scene where a doctor's saying, you know what? It looks like you have prostate cancer, but it's probably, based on the history we know, overwhelmingly likely that it's a very slow moving one. You probably won't die from it. But what we can do is monitor it, and we'll watch it closely. And if we need to, we'll do surgery then. And the guy said, so you're telling me now I have prostate cancer, something to watch, probably is not going to kill me, better to wait. That's what he decided to do. There is a risk that the surgery would have saved his life, but it's a very low risk. And why is it a low risk? There is a chance he'll die from prostate cancer, but what do we know? He probably would have died from it anyway, even with the surgery. Because what they know about prostate cancer is the people who die from prostate cancer have a very fast moving prostate cancer, that even when they get the surgery, they still have a high probability of dying from it. So even then, even if he ends up dying from prostate cancer, he probably could have, even if he got the surgery. But that's what this doctor told him. Let's just monitor it and see what happens. It's still a little nerve-wracking, a little scary, right? But what about the side effects of the surgery? He's probably thinking about that as well too. You're telling me I got a good chance that this won't affect me at all, but if I have the surgery, I'm going to have all this stuff to deal with. I forget what the numbers were up there. 30 of those men had those bad side effects. That's a high percentage of those men had the bad side effects. But it's different doctors, right? One doctor says, you have prostate cancer. If we operate, we can save your life. The other says, you know what? Let's monitor it. What we now call cancer maybe shouldn't be called cancer at all. Cancers are heterogeneous and can follow multiple paths, not all of which progress to death. A new technology is increasingly able to find these abnormalities. This is a really important point here. What is technology doing? So remember, everywhere else technology does what? Reduces cost. What does technology do here? It increases treatments. It finds more stuff. It doesn't reduce costs, it increases volumes. When we do, our inclination is to act even when the remedy turns out to be far more harmful than the disease would have been had it run its course. Americans tend, oh, this is, boy, I think you should all put this quote in your paper under overdiagnosis. Americans tend to be over-tested, overdiagnosed, and over-treated across a variety of conditions. And it accounts for 10 to 30% of US healthcare spending. Isn't that a great phrase? These are all related, right? Over-tested does what? Makes you find something, which does what? Makes you treat something. So you see my argument with President Obama. What is going in for regular checkups doing for 60-year-old men and women? They're finding stuff. And we'll see later the percentage of people in their 60s that you will find something. It's a high percentage of people. Have y'all heard the term defensive medicine? Right? You're not testing people because you think it's good for their health, or you think you're going to find something that's really going to help them. You're testing them because of the 1 in a million chance they have something and you didn't catch it. Now they're going to sue you. So you might as well do it overboard. Salary physicians who receive no income. Now, we're going to talk about salary. So you say, let's pay them a salary instead of paying them by treatment. You might think, well, that'll solve the problem. But unfortunately, salary and physicians who receive no income from increased volume, who had limited liability concerns, ordered as many heart stress demean testing unnecessary as doctors in more traditional settings. So there is an inertia in this. There's doctors who do stuff because that's the way we've always done it. So you have to change. It's not just a matter of not paying them for volume. You're going to have to pay them for outcomes, all right? Because there's a habit. They do what everybody else is doing because that's what everybody else is doing, all right? So there's a professional kind of habit forming here. An exaggerated perception of benefit of the test. You see this on the doctor movies all the time, don't you? We need to run more tests. Why? Well, because we didn't find anything. We think we can find something. So go back again, look somewhere else. We'll find something somewhere that we can cut out of you. Some patients who are diagnosed with cancer do not need to be treated because that cancer is never going to bother them. The problem is we don't know who these people are. That's a big part. That's essentially the definition of overdiagnosis. And now the technology can find these little dots inside our bodies. Yeah, I mean, it's possible that's going to kill that person. There's a good chance it won't, but we don't know. We don't know the difference in those two. Now, technology is coming along. A lot of this DNA mapping and you know, the gene splicing kind of stuff we're doing is getting better and better and better to know whom this benefits and whom this doesn't, especially with pharmaceuticals. There are some pharmaceuticals that their effective rate is really very, very low, like 10% benefit. And they're expensive pharmaceuticals, but they're now finding with gene therapy, they can say, you know, this pharmaceutical works best for people with this DNA. And so we'll only use it from them. So they are finding ways to get a little bit better. Doctors know that approximately 10% of localized cancer tumors and 20 to 30% of breast cancer tumors that are found in screening would never cause harm. That tumor would just stay there, never grow, never spread. The rate is even higher for prostate cancer at 60%. So 60% of people that are diagnosed with prostate cancer, if they did nothing, would be perfectly fine the rest of their life. That's a high percentage. Prostate cancer, you'll see it in the video, definitely. They talk a lot about prostate cancer. And they talk about breast cancer, and they talk about C-sections. There's quite a few of them. And they talk about end of life. It covers a lot of this stuff. It talks about that. The diagnosis will create anxiety and lead to additional unnecessary tests. The National Cancer Institute group recommended reducing frequency of some screening, focusing that screening on high-risk groups, and raising requirements that would lead to a biopsy or other follow-up care. I might tell you my personal story on my particular surgery because I wish I had done it much different. All right, let's talk breast cancer. Overdiagnosis is a term many are unfamiliar with. In cancer, it refers, here's a definition if you need a definition of it, refers to a tumor that fulfills all laboratory criteria to be called cancer, but if left alone, will do no harm. Okay. The problem is when they find it and they test it, they don't know that it's going to do no harm. All right, any questions on the definition of overdiagnosis? We're not talking about fraud here. We're not talking about doctors saying, hey, you got cancer when you don't have cancer. We're going to actually see that that is actually the case with some doctors in Medicare fraud. So there is fraud, but that's not what we're talking about here. Overdiagnosis is not fraud. It's finding something, it's legitimate, but we just don't know if it's going to kill or not, or be serious or not. The problem is related to advances in technology. We already talked through that. All right, so we got the definition. Overdiagnosis, overtreatment in cancer. National data demonstrates significant increases in early stage disease without a proportional decline at later stage. All right, I now have a very strong argument I can use against President Obama. He's saying go early so they find it early. Well, people went early. We're capturing people earlier in the stage. So what would you expect death rates would do? They should decline. What did they discover? Death rates didn't decline. Thyroid cancer is probably, you're going to see that. I think I have the table coming up here. Thyroid cancer is like the perfect example of that. Screening for breast cancer and prostate cancer appears to detect more cancers that are potentially clinically insignificant. In contrast, colon and cervical cancer are examples of effective screening. So colon cancer screening, as horrible as the test is, well, now they just put you under, right? So you don't even know you're going through the test. But those are the ones you want to do, because there they do find stuff early and they do save lives. But prostate, breast cancer, especially, they don't mention thyroid cancer. Well, here it is, thyroid cancers. So this table, it's a little confusing to read, but let's look at the thyroid cancer. Okay, so here's the diagnosis per 100,000 people. In 1975, they caught 5 out of 100,000. In 2010, they were catching 14. So man, you say, wow, this is great. The medical system is catching 3 times more people early. We're going to save all these lives. Mortality. What happened to mortality? We caught 185% more people. Mortality went down 7%. What does that mean? We're doing a lot of surgeries that are completely unnecessary. So that's my surgery is thyroid. I went through this process. Boy, I wish I'd read this book that I read, some of these articles, but went through this process. The guy says, oh, I didn't go to him because I had something wrong with my throat. I had bronchitis, so I went to him. He says, oh, I detected a small lump in your throat. We better get that biopsy. So they did some tests. They said, wow, we can't really tell this. And the test is not effective. We need to do more tests. We did more tests. Kept doing tests, and he kept saying, you know what, the tests aren't telling us anything. We really don't know. I think the only solution is surgery. So it's okay, surgery, I guess so. I should have gone to another doctor. I was so stupid. But we're just going to take half of it out. We'll leave the other half. That way, if it's not cancer, you still have half your thyroid. Say, okay, that's great. Let's do that. So I get the surgery. He doesn't come see me. He calls me on the phone. He says, it was cancerous. We're going to take the other side out tomorrow. So, okay, fine. Thanks, doctor. You couldn't walk to my, you just cut my throat, but you can't walk to my room. But okay, that's fine. Then I read an article and it says, tests on thyroid are almost never effective. They never can tell if it's cancerous or not. So, okay, that's interesting. Oh, and they like to take one side out and then do the other side the next day. Why? Because they get the charge for 2 surgeries. I'm going, wow, I wish I'd read this before my surgery. But anyway, I talked to a doctor friend of mine. He says, oh no, it's a good thing you got the surgery. So, okay, whatever. But it's like, are you in on this as well? He was a heart surgeon, so I don't know. But anyway, I mean, I wish I'd gone to, I would have paid $100, $200 to another doctor and say, hey, you're not doing my surgery, but I want you to tell me the truth here. And you're going to see, and it's going to be in the video, where you're going to see this room full of people that are high paid as the solution. And why is that the solution? You have people in the room and they're debating whether or not to do this surgery. And they're saying, no, I don't think we should do it. We should just monitor. And that's what I wish I had done. Let's just monitor this thing and just see what's going to happen. But anyway, that's my own personal story before I'd actually gotten into this whole thing of really scrutinizing it. So anyway, but I could have monitored it and end up killing me. So, who knows? We don't know. That's the frustrating part of this. Optimal screening frequency depends on the cancer's growth rate. If cancer is fast growing, screening's almost useless, right? If it's a fast growing cancer, unless you just get there the exact minute when you need to, right? Are you going to see your doctor like once a week? I mean, that's the kind of thing where it's just, if the cancer is slow growing but progressing, a long latency and pancreatic lesion, well, I don't know what all those words mean. Screening as the ideal, just go get screened more often, and there's going to come a point where they're going to say, hey, you're going to do it. That's what they told me. We'll see you in 10 years. I'm like, great, because I don't want to see you for another 10 years. They wouldn't even let me do an Uber to drive home. I had to have a friend come pick me up. I was like, got to call someone to come pick me up. I was tempted to get the Uber and say, I'll give you a $50 tip if you'll pretend like you know me and drive me home. But I was scared they'd still send them away. In the case of an indolent tumor, detection is potentially harmful. Why? Because it's not going to do anything to you. Just let it go. These observations provide an opportunity to refocus screening on reducing disease morbidity and mortality and lower the burden of cancer screenings and treatments. All right, so that's what that $1 billion was for. That's why they said no mammograms for women in their 40s. That's why they said no PSA test. Why? Because they do far more harm than good. More people are being harmed by these than are being helped. What happens, you'll see later, what happens when they say don't do these tests? Well, you're going to see the articles that are written in the editorial papers. The original intent of screening was to detect cancer early. However, detection of cancers with better biology contributes to better outcomes. Screening always results in identifying more indolent. Y'all know what the word indolent means? I don't, but I know it means harmless, but I don't know what it actually means. But I can look it up. Wanting to avoid activity or exertion, lazy. So if you have a lazy cancer, just let it sit there and do whatever it's going to do. All right, let's talk PSA. You're going to get a lot of PSA in this video. Ben Stiller, one of the few comedians on the side of the pond who can make me laugh, said prostate cancer testing saved his life. That sounds really good, right? Prostate cancer saved my life. The honest answer is they don't know. There's one chance in 14 it saved his life. There's 13 chances out of 14 that he went through unnecessary surgery. You know who Ben Stiller is? Right? Isn't that Seinfeld? Is it the guy on Seinfeld or not? No, I'm getting mixed. I think they're related though, aren't they?
That's his dad.
That's his dad? So what's his dad's name? Sorry. The internet is, oh, Jerry Stiller. Yeah. Jerry Stiller, but he's hilarious. They're both pretty funny. But anyway, it saved my life. And that's what we say. That's what I would tell people that on my thyroid cancer. Boy, this doctor saved my life. Boy, if I hadn't gone in and seen him for my bronchitis, would have had cancer and never known about it. It sounds good, doesn't it? If PSA screening saves Peter, Tom, and Rajiv, but kills because of complications of surgery, Dick and Anil, the net benefit is 1. If it also kills Donald, the net benefit is 0. But here's the important point. Even if the net benefit is 0, it still means that it saved 3 people's lives. So what do we say? You get the surgery, it saved my life. You don't really know if it did or didn't. If it kills you, you say, well, I had no choice. I had this surgery. I had this cancer, how to get it out. The trial showed screening for prostate cancer had a measurable treatment effect, and 293 people had to be invited for screening to prevent 1 death. That's impressive. For a comparison, the number needed screen reduced death from lung cancer smokers is 320. Screening is beyond net survivor benefits. PSA screening can lead to harms from surgery or radiation. The value or disutility of a harm is subjective and personal. It gets even more complicated. Urologists are getting better at sparing nerves during prostate surgery. That's pretty important, right? So you don't have to do adult diapers the rest of your life. That's pretty important for most people. I don't know if there's a pun here or not, but understand why your urologists are pissed off that the US PSTF has knocked down PSA testing, but not mammograms. Some say he's spreading misinformation by advocating PSA screening. I argue that it's not possible to spread misinformation. Why? You're going to see this in the video. This is probably one of the most shocking things is evidentiary medicine is hated in the United States for some reason. And it's like hospitals and doctors, they don't want to do it because we may find out that we should stop doing something that's very, very profitable for us. As for me, as a citizen of the United States, this makes me really, really mad. This is exactly what I want. I want to know that if I get the knee surgery, that I'm not going to be any better off if I just go to rehab 5 years from now. I'd rather not have surgery than to have surgery, especially if there's a high probability I'm going to pick up some infection in the way. You know, don't give me the surgery if I'm better off not getting it. I want that kind of information. Screening is an information problem. Some benefit, some are harm, but we don't know. And there's a resistance to actually finding out, which is pretty amazing. We're gonna come back. We're gonna get probably most of our overdiagnosis from the video, and you're gonna see why when you see the video. It's really quite prominent in that video. All right, what about the quality of the care in the United States? US spends, come up to page 41 here. We spend the most, and we have the worst out of 11. There's actually a chart here. I can't update this chart. It's quite old. However, I bet it hasn't changed much. So how does the UK doing? Where's the only place they rank poorly? They're really bad on cost. They're like last place on cost. They're the cheapest. How do they do on everything else? They're third on timeliness. Okay, we kind of knew that, right? That's kind of the question. They're not like last place on timeliness. Canada. So the complaints about Canada look like they're correct. Canada ranks 11th. How does the US do on timeliness? I mean, on timeliness, we're not even that good on timeliness. Where did it rank? Last, healthy lives. That kind of makes sense. The British and Americans, we eat badly and we don't exercise. Okay. France ranks number 1. But US, look what we rank. Our overall ranking is last, and we're the most expensive. You can put that. I don't mind you putting out-of-date stuff into your paper because I really don't think it's changed that radically. So this is very old data, but it probably has not changed that much. We're definitely still the most expensive, and we definitely still rank very, very low versus others. Now, if you're curious of what they actually grade, you might look down the list and see what they actually say here. But US ranks 11th overall, UK ranks 1st, Switzerland ranks 2nd, Sweden, so you've seen the Nordic countries doing fairly decently. Let me go back up to the quotes. UK, which is ranked highest, blew the US out of the water despite the fact that the country spends less than half as much. The US also spends the most as percentage of GDP. We've already seen that. Yeah, this is, the older you are, the worse the hospital is for you. Do you realize one of the unhealthiest things you can do is to go to a hospital when you're sick? Because you're going to pick up diseases and all kinds of things. I remember one, I think it was Grey's Anatomy. They had this this medical student, you know, what I forget, you know, he's on his intern or whatever, and they just showed this guy as just incompetent. He was just the worst student ever. And the last scene, he was such a friendly guy, and he was getting fired. And they did a good job in this TV show, I think, in this particular one, because you're kind of feeling sorry for the guy because he's just kind of just clumsy and all this. And last thing they do, they show him walking in and helping someone out or something. He didn't wash his hands, and they show him essentially infecting something, and he ends up killing one of these patients that you also love. And they're trying to make the point, like, don't feel sorry for this guy. He's going to kill you if you don't get him out of this profession. So I thought they did a really good job of that. But yeah, when you show up to a hospital, this is a dangerous place to be. Many elderly patients deteriorate mentally or physically in the hospital, even if they recover from the original illness. About 1/3 of patients over 70 years old and more than half of patients over 85 leave the hospital more disabled than when they arrived. Those are some pretty big numbers, aren't they? So you're going to talk about end of life. What are we going to deal with this end of life? The first question is, are we doing them any good? Are we actually benefiting these people? So what does it say here? Over half of people over 85 are worse off when they leave the hospital than when they came. That doesn't sound good to me. And 1/3 of patients over 70 are worse off when they left when they arrived. That doesn't sound good to me either. The older you are, the worse the hospital is for you. A lot of the stuff we do in medicine does more harm than good, and sometimes with the care of older people, less is more. So we're going to see later studies, and I can't remember where it is exactly, so I will repeat myself some. But they've done surveys with doctors and asked them, would you want this treatment done to you? And doctors that do these treatments all the time, they say, no, I do not want that done to me. That tells you something, right? The surgeries, the things they're doing, the CPR, all these kind of things they're doing, they're saying, no, I would not want that. The iron lung. And why? Because they know these things have a very low success rate and they do tremendous harm and pain and discomfort to the patient. Like, no, don't do that to me. That's pretty eye-opening and telling. Hospital staff often fail to feed the older patients properly, get them out of bed, control their pain. Providers frequently restrict their movements by essentially hooking them up to the bed with oxygen tanks. Doctors subject them to unnecessary procedures. I mean, if you're in I don't know if any of y'all been in a hospital, but overnight in a hospital, boy, they keep the lights on. There's people making noise all the time. Someone drops a bedpan and makes all this noise. You know, it's just not, you're not going to sleep well. You're going to sleep much better in your own bed at home. Unnecessary procedures, prescribe redundant and potentially harmful medications. Caregivers deprive them of sleep by placing them in noisy wards or checking vital signs all throughout the night. San Francisco General, its acute care for elders ward, has special accommodations and a team of providers to address unique needs of the patients. This is what we're going to have to do because we have all these baby boomers getting into their 60s, 70s, and 80s. We're going to have to change the way we handle these people. They focus less on original diagnosis and more on how to get the patients back home. So they actually have a hospital saying, we want you out of here. You're much better at home than you are here. Anything we can do to get you home is going to be better. Living as independently as possible. Bed rest is really, really bad. It sets off an explosive chain of events that are very detrimental to people's health. You might think bed rest would be the best thing, but no, we get to get people up and walking around doing things. There's a book I really, really like, but I don't remember the name of it. Let's see if I can come up. I think it's called Being Mortal. Yeah, there it is. I'm nervous to say I recommend this book because you're gonna think there's something wrong with me. It's a pretty morbid book. It's talking about death and dying. But you get my age, you start thinking about this. Your parents aren't old enough to be thinking about this, but your grandparents are. But you know that's not your issue. Your issue is going to be your parents. So read this book in about 30 years. But this is the whole thing he's talking about is, do we really need to be so Herculean to keep elderly people alive for an extra month or two? And some things he talks about, like in nursing homes, they say, hey, you can't smoke, that's bad for your health. You can't have a pet, you might trip over them. He says, let the guy smoke a cigarette. My word, he's 93 years old. He wants to smoke a cigarette, let him smoke a cigarette. My word, he's made it this far in smoking. Like, no, that's bad for his health. He's 93. He's gonna die in the next couple of years anyway. Oh, but smoking might cut 3 weeks off his life. It's like, big deal, he's gonna be a lot happier. Can't have a dog, he might trip over a dog. Let him have a dog. He might trip over him, it's his life. But the point he makes is, at the end of life, people at the end of their life have less freedom than American prisoners do. They have less freedom to do what they want to do than someone in a high security prison. So he makes some important points, but you're too young to be worrying about this. So I'm thinking about this because my mom's at that age where we're having issues with what we're going to do for her. And we're going to make sure she's really well taken care of. But I don't want to make the mistake that he talks about is we got to do what's going to make her live the longest versus we got to do what's going to make her the happiest for the end of her life. Which of those do we do? What if we do something that might cut time off of her life, but she's much, much happier? It's like, no, mom, you can't do that. So that's what he's talking about. I think it's an interesting concept. And this is the other thing we're saying. We put people in hospitals because they got these serious illnesses. They may be better off we just let them go home and live in the place they're comfortable with. How hospitals handle the old is a pressing problem. Elderly patients are a growing clientele for hospitals, a trend that will only accelerate. One bad hospitalization can tip them over the edge and they may never recover. My grandfather, his nickname was Tiny because he was a huge guy, real tall and just big guy. So they called him Tiny. You would have thought he had a lot of health issues because he was just such a big guy, but he didn't. He was great health. And then he was climbing a tree to get something out of the tree and he fell. And after that, it just never recovered and just deteriorated. And so that's kind of the way the entity life is. You can be healthy, and you have one event and that changes everything. And so that's just the nature of this group of people. Doctors and hospitals focus so intensely on treating the illnesses that they can overlook nearly all aspects of caring for the patient. Hospitals face new consequences if elderly patients become more impaired, less functional. The federal government penalizes hospitals when patients fall. So what do they say? Hey, you're not walking around because if you fall, you're going to have an injury, we're going to be penalized. We're actually, the bureaucracy of this is actually making patients worse off. Getting preventable infections are returned to the hospital within 30 days, but hospitals aren't held accountable if patients lose their memories or their ability to work. Most don't measure those things. So that's an important term right there. This is something that Michael Porter is going to really talk about is we need to know what we need to be measuring. For measuring the wrong things, we're going to be treating the wrong things. How do we measure? What are the outcomes we need? Improving care for older patients requires an investment that hospital administrators are not willing to make. Some argue, however, that the investment pays off, not just for older people, but for the country intent on controlling its spending. All right, I'm going to start here. I want to get into this a little bit more. All right, so I'm giving you, y'all see why I think the end of life care is under talked about in the papers. Like there's a whole lot here. This is a huge part. This is the reason Medicare and VA is the bulk of our spending in the United States. All right, so we'll start there. All right, let you out 6 minutes early so you can go work on paper one.